Will winter ever end? So today I wanted to walk around the garden and discuss a little bit of some garden plans that I have for this coming season. As I mentioned a few videos ago when I was walking around, I'm not going to be doing a lot of transformation this season. This season is going to be a watch and see season to show you and show myself really what all I accomplished over the past year, because as you know, if you've been watching my channel since I started in December 2020, none of this stuff behind me was here, even as of July last year. So a lot of these garden spaces in the back are only 6 months old. And so what I'm trying to still decide is, against the fence line here, whether I'm going to be putting in some bigger shrubs as I find them, which I've considered doing, or if I'm going to be doing kind of a, I don't want to call it necessarily a cut flower garden, because I don't really have the space to do a cut flower garden in that instance. I'm very selective about the plants I add in general to my garden, and so I like to pick a lot of things, both shrub, perennial, and even annual, that I can cut on to bring inside the house to bring some of that beauty indoors during the summer. And then after all that stuff gets going, I don't know if you have this problem, but I end up not wanting to cut it at all because it looks so good outside that I just leave it, and then I do a couple bouquets during the summer and that's it. I want to really focus on doing some more cut flowers. I'm not going to be selling cut flowers. I don't have the space to be productive for that type of business, I guess you could say. But if I can give some to friends here and there, or just enjoy myself, a weekly bouquet or something around the garden as things bloom, I really want to do something like that. So this side over here along the fence line, I'm not sure, as I mentioned, whether I'll be doing large shrubs. I would like to add some bigger items over here for some privacy, but it also would be a good opportunity to stick a lot of zinnias there. They of course won't get a ton of water, direct water from the sprinkler system right there, and so I won't have to worry maybe about as much powdery mildew from the sprinkler irrigation. I think I've mentioned in previous videos in the fall that my vegetable garden is going to be a little different this year too. I'm going to actually be planting my dahlias in this front bed right here, and probably this section of that bed back there. The dahlias I did back in the mini orchard this past season, and they didn't do great. I mean, I had some good blooms. They started really late in the season, and they need more attention than I was able to give them back in the mini orchard. Of course, I had a lot of projects going on, but it was also one of those out of sight, out of mind type things. And if I see them right here, they'll be right around my flower beds, and then of course I'll be able to have the opportunity to check on them more regularly. That means my tomatoes will be going in the back in the mini orchard, and they may not get as much attention, but I typically don't have a lot of issues or pest pressure on my tomatoes specifically here in Ohio. So the tomatoes are going to go back there. I will do my regular pruning on those, and then the dahlias are going up to the front. One thing I have not done this winter at all is checked on my dahlias. I've decided after this year we're going to see how the dahlias do storage without me checking on them, and I'm not pulling them back up for storage this coming season. So what I intend to do this fall is get a soil heating cable and put that in the vegetable garden. We have a plug right there, an outlet, an external outlet, and hook it up directly and run the soil heating cable over winter to try and protect the dahlias best I can. Dahlias typically survive best in zones 8 and above over winter. If you're in zone 7, you can also have a pretty good chance if you mulch them up. I am of course in zone 6, but I am not gonna focus any longer, I have decided, on anything that I have to dig up and store. I just have not had great success storing dahlias that way. I don't have any method of keeping them in like a cooler or a root cellar. This would be my 3rd year growing dahlias. The first year I had almost no success. I only had a couple Dahlias survive because I planted them directly in the ground, and as you know, my clay soil, they did not handle that at all. I had several of them rot before the season even began. And then last year I did them in the raised bed and had pretty good success. Apparently, I think a lot of people around this area had issues with dahlias last year, so there can be finicky plants. There's not a lot of upkeep other than deadheading after you get them going, but in my experience, and it may be just the varieties I got, I haven't had excellent success that I would like to repeat. So this may be my last year growing dahlias. I don't know. We will plant them out. If any of the ones that I have storing currently in my garage survive over winter, we will do a video on that after or right before our last frost, somewhere around in there. I intend to just dump them out. One of the main reasons I just don't want to deal with it anymore is the storage aspect. You can have substantial loss if you don't check them regularly and make sure they're moist enough. I don't typically have that problem. My problem is with them desiccating mostly, so they're not getting enough moisture, but I really don't want to have to deal with pulling them out once a month over winter and spritzing them with water if they need a little more water. And it's just a pain in the neck is what I'm trying to say, that I am trying to manage my garden so I don't have to do stuff like that regularly during winter, and it's also just really, really messy. So we'll see if this is my last year growing dahlias. I don't know, maybe not. The other things I am going to be focusing on this season is perennials. Now, if you've been following my channel, you know I did a video almost exclusively last summer or fall, and I was removing a lot of perennials from my garden, and I was substituting perennials for small shrubs, mostly by proven winners that provide a lot of interest in both foliage or blooms, and so that way I wouldn't have to worry about necessarily cleaning up perennials in the spring, and then in the summer, and then in the fall. So one thing I've just been focusing on in my garden is trying to cut down on the maintenance. I work outside a lot during the week, and especially on the weekends during garden season. I don't know if I could tell you how many hours I spend out here. It's certainly more at the beginning of the season and the end of the season. When it gets the hottest, I just kind of sit back and enjoy the fruits of my labor. But the perennials I'm going to be focusing on this year, you'll see I'm going to be doing a whole video on it probably at the beginning of March. I want to make sure everything I have my eye set on comes in, and I'm going to be able to get it, and then I'm going to do a video on everything that I've ordered. I'm going to be focusing on a lot of cone flowers and a lot of other perennials that are very drought tolerant. So as you know, my garden is full of drip irrigation. One thing I've got to do in the spring is add drip to all the new areas that I created last fall, and that's going to be a lot of work, quite honestly. And so one of the things that I also want to cut down on is water usage. And so the hydrangeas, of course, need water, and I focus mainly my drip irrigation efforts on watering shrubs. There's not a whole lot of drip irrigation to perennials in my garden, so I'm going to pick perennials that do really well in dry conditions. Now, specifically where my home is located in Ohio, we get very little rain in July and August sometimes. Sometimes we can see a whole month without rain, which is really odd for this specific location. Just north of us it rains, and just south of us it rains, so it's kind of a joke, running joke for me that we just don't get rain when I need it. And that's one of the reasons I have to use drip irrigation. Else a lot of my plants would just look really terrible going into fall. It is also really cold today, guys. It is currently 27, so I'm shaking a little bit, and my voice is getting a little jittery, so I'm going to wrap up this video soon. But one thing I wanted to tell you is look for a video coming in the next couple weeks about the plants and the perennials I have already ordered and will be adding to my garden this year. I'm also going to be focusing a little bit on some ground covers. One of the goals of my garden is to mulch less. I think last year or the year before we brought in over 20 yards of mulch. I didn't keep good track of it this past year in 2021, I think because we were doing this new area, and so it was kind of skewed. I brought in a lot of bagged mulch last year that I would typically bring in bulk mulch because I worked on little small areas at a time. But one of the things I'm going to start focusing on, and I have already somewhat in my garden, is covering the soil. Whether that's covered during winter by some spreading ground cover, whether that's covered by shrubs in the summer and spring, or whether that's covered by a spreading perennial ground cover of some kind, such as the 𝗖𝗢𝗗𝗦. I've added 𝗖𝗢𝗗𝗦 to my garden elsewhere, and I had someone comment in the video that I showed it. I think it was the garden tour from July, and they were like, I would regret putting it in my garden. Well, that may be the case for some people, and I understand where those statements come from, because anyone can have a bad experience with a plant. I've had my bad experiences, and I've told you about those, and I've removed those plants. But Ajuga is very efficient in doing what you really want it to do if you want a ground cover. It covers really well and just crowds out weeds. And so the fact that I want to reduce the amount of mulching that I'm doing in my garden, so I don't have to mulch every year in every location in my garden, is going to be priority. I'm not going to say priority number one this coming season, but it's going to be high up on the priority list. A lot of people ask me what I do to suppress weeds in my garden, because when they see my garden, they're like, there are no weeds here. I promise you there are weeds. I just add a lot of mulch. And one of the reasons I add a lot of mulch is to amend our heavy clay soil, because it is just really terrible at drainage, and I want to get as much organic matter into the soil as possible. So the incredible hydrangea hedge, which is behind me right here on the side of the house, I actually don't think I've mulched that area significantly for over 2 years. When I put in those hydrangeas almost 4 years ago now, it'll be 4 years ago in March or April. I think I picked them up in March of 2018 maybe. We added almost 6+ inches of mulch to that area. So if you have issues with weeds in your garden, mulch is certainly a great way to reduce weed pressure. There are also chemical applications you can obviously spray to your landscaping beds to control weeds, but I don't use any of them, and I don't recommend that you use them either. Simply because I'll go over this in a separate video, but before you start putting down Preen, which is what a lot of people use, make sure you check the plants that you shouldn't be putting Preen around, because you might be surprised at the damage Preen can cause to some of your very well-loved plants. Hydrangeas is like number one on the list for me as to one of the reasons I don't use Preen, other than I just don't want to put a chemical like that in my flower beds. So hydrangeas is on the list of plants typically that you can't use Preen around. There is an organic version of Preen that uses cornmeal, I believe, and that would be fine to add to your garden if you find it's effective. I've never tried it, but if you've used the cornmeal in the past, let us know below in your experience with that. Landscape fabric is another one. You know, I don't use it in my actual flower beds. I have used it around the fence line to keep weeds from growing under the fence. I do not recommend it anywhere else, and I'm actually going to have a project this spring. Back when I became a new gardener, the first garden space I obviously designed was my vegetable garden, and I put landscape fabric down there. Cheap landscape fabric from Sam's Club or Costco, which I would not recommend if you're going to use landscape fabric at all for any purpose. I don't recommend in a flower bed. If you want to put it on a pathway or something, DeWitt Pro is the way to go, and I have several videos about that on my channel. But I have got to remove landscape fabric in my vegetable garden this coming spring, and that is going to be a massive project because it has several inches of mulch that have broken down over the years and just become soil. And the reason I'm doing that is because I intend to put micro clover there, to cover and suppress weeds. I'm having a really bad weed issue in the vegetable garden, and that's primarily because all the mulch that I put down there has broken down over time, and now we're left with basically soil. And so I gotta dig 2 to 3 inches of soil off of this landscaping fabric, and I'll be putting down another ground cover. Micro clover is what I'm gonna go with. Hope I don't bite my tongue when I put that in, and hope I don't have any bad results. I've seen some really interesting applications of it, and a viewer actually brought it up a while ago, and I thought I would try it out. So we're going to experiment in the vegetable garden with micro clover this spring. Follow along, subscribe if you're not subscribed. You want to look at those things as they come up, and remember, in a world full of hate, be a light. Stay warm, everybody. Bye.